With only less than a month left in the regular season, we're still in the middle of an extraordinarily close MVP race between three-time winner Nikola Jokic and last year's runner-up Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. It is a fascinating battle wherein we're watching arguably the world's best player in the middle of his best NBA season going up against a generational scoring machine who's anchoring the most dominant team in the entire league. Both Shai and Jokic lead legitimate contenders, and both players bring it every single game, all while having massive responsibilities with the ball in their hands. Although at this point, the betting market seems to have already concluded that the MVP award all but goes to SGA, with him being given a massive 83.3% probability to win as opposed to the slim 22.2% chance given to the Joker. But the thing is, one look at the advanced statistics alone doesn't exactly show a clear-cut MVP winner at this point, as Shai and Jokic basically alternate between first and second place in just about every metric available, which to me makes the lopsidedness of the MVP odds somewhat confusing. And for the record, I am a Thunder fan, so my natural impulse is to simply have my bias leaning towards Shai, and because of that, it would also be easy for me to simply point towards voter fatigue to potentially downplay Nikola Jokic's case to win. But of course, rather than doing that, in this video, I would like to dive deeper into both players' MVP campaigns so far with the intent of intertwining Shai and Jokic's cases using categories such as stats and his historical context, player impact, team success, and lastly, the inevitable talk about narrative, so that by the end of this video, I could present my clear and definitive stand regarding my pick for this season's MVP. So let's get to it. First, let's begin with the stats and their historical context. The defending MVP Nikola Jokic is currently averaging a 29, 12, and 10 triple-double, while also putting up a career-high 1.8 steals together with 0.7 blocks per game. He's also sporting hyper-efficient 57, 41, and 80% shooting splits, together with an elite 65.9 true shooting percentage. On the other hand, SGA is averaging a league-leading 32.8 points per game with 5 rebounds, 6 assists, 1.7 steals, and a block per game on 52, 37, and 90% shooting splits with an equally efficient 64.1% true shooting clip. All in all, we're looking at two ridiculous and historic stat lines. First, Jokic would be on pace to be just the third player ever to average a triple-double for a full season, and you can definitely argue that it's the most impressive instance. Oscar Robertson did it in 1962 when he averaged 30, 12, and 11, but with a true shooting mark of just 55.4%. And it's worth noting that the NBA also didn't have the three-point shot yet back at that time. More recently, Russell Westbrook averaged a triple-double for a season 4 times, but he also topped at just 55.4% true shooting. So nobody has done it with the efficiency of Jokic at almost 66% true shooting, and I think that matters quite a bit. Well, sure, those triple-doubles happen in different eras, but I think what makes Jokic's triple-double season even more impressive is that it exists in today's era, which gives a ton of focus and efficiency. Plus, Jokic doing it at the center position is also unique, considering both Westbrook and Robertson were actually point guards. Well, sure, at some level, maybe Westbrook and Robertson grabbing so many rebounds is just as abnormal as Jokic dishing out so many assists, but it's just that we're so used to guards grabbing rebounds and players putting up triple-doubles nowadays to the point that Jokic's impressive numbers sometimes feel so casual. But even then, you just can't look past the fact that Jokic has a total of 29 triple-doubles this season, which is one more than that of the next 3 players combined on this season's triple-double leaderboard. Jokic also just posted the first 30-point, 20 rebound, and 20 assist game in NBA history, which also kinda reminds me of the time when Westbrook dropped a 20-20-20 game during his MVP season in 2017. Which again, I think reminds us that what the Joker's doing this season just isn't normal. Although when you go from Jokic's stats to that of SGA's, I think it's also wrong to feel deflated or feel that Shai's numbers aren't as impressive. In terms of production, style, and impact, Shai is actually a modern-day Michael Jordan, and if you think that's sacrilege, you're simply not paying attention. As Shai and Michael Jordan are the only players in NBA history to average at least 32 points, 6 assists, and 5 rebounds, while making at least 50% of their shots for a full season. Meanwhile, when you add at least 1.5 steals to that stat line, it's only Shai, Jordan, and James Harden who's done that in NBA history. But then, when you add a full block per game to the equation, Shai stands alone by himself. And I think what's even more impressive is that Shai is averaging just 34.3 minutes played per game this season, which is by far the lowest lowest average minutes spent on the court among all those players from the 33, 6, and 5 club. And Shai is also doing all of this while putting up a 64% true shooting percentage, which is actually even higher than that of Steph Curry's true shooting percentage when he won MVP in 2015. And mind you, Shai's efficiency doesn't come from a Steph Curry-esque level of three-point shooting, and Shai doesn't even shoot the ball from the field as well as Jokic. But then Shai is able to compensate by scoring the ball near the basket like a big man. He's shooting 71% at the rim, which is practically the same as Jokic's 71.8% clip, with both players' total field goals and attempts from the rim also pretty much being equal. And for a 6'6" guard to be doing that is extremely impressive. Outside of that, both Shai and Jokic are brilliant tacticians scoring the ball from the middle of the floor. The mid-range has been sort of a prohibited zone in today's NBA, but both Jokic and Shai have been efficient from that area. Jokic is at 52% while Shai is at 51%, although it's worth noting that Shai has attempted 200 more shots than Jokic from that zone. Meanwhile, Jokic holds the edge in terms of three-point shooting percentage, while Shai is simply a better free throw shooter. Moving on, let's talk about the player impact category. Looking at it, the Denver Nuggets are a plus 9.9 points per 100 possessions with Jokic on the floor and are a minus 8.6 per 100 with him on the bench, which equates to a massive 18.5 difference. Meanwhile, the OKC Thunder are a plus 16.8 with Shai on the floor and are still at plus 4.4 with him on the bench, which equates to a 12.4 differential, which is still huge. Well, first and foremost, I think we have to take these on and off net rating numbers with a massive grain of salt. They're a nice indicator of impact, but I still believe that lineup data for a full season is far more telling with these kinds of net rating stats. But just to keep it simple, there is this big assumption that the impact of Jokic on the Nuggets is far greater than the impact of SGA on the Thunder. And part of that is because OKC has just blown everybody out at a historical rate this season. Well, for sure, when you go by these on and off metrics, Jokic definitely shows a much bigger 18.5 point difference per 100 possessions, meaning with him on the floor, the Nuggets are exceptionally dominant, but with him on the bench, they're basically the Utah Jazz. And this is not surprising at all, as only Trae Young has created more points via assists than Nikola Jokic this season. Then when you add those to the points that Jokic scores himself and also the ones he opens up with his screens, per ESPN's points created metric, Jokic is generating a massive 66.1 points per 36 minutes of floor time for Denver, which is actually 14 points more than what Shai produces for OKC. Overall, it's just that Nikola Jokic is carrying such a sizable offensive burden for the Nuggets, largely because Denver really needs him to do it. With Jamal Murray struggling for the first 20 or so games of the season, with Aaron Gordon missing more than 40% of the season with various injuries, and with nobody else other than Westbrook able to offer much in terms of consistent shot creation, it is impressive that Denver still holds the NBA's third best offensive rating while still holding on to the third seed in the Western Conference. And all in all, you just can't place the lion's share of the credit for Denver's success anywhere but in the hands of Nikola Jokic. But still, that doesn't take away the fact that the OKC Thunder have been historically dominant with Shai on the floor. To be blowing opponents by 16.8 points per 100 possessions with Shai on the floor is basically equal to 2016 Steph Curry type stuff for Golden State. Well, sure, without Shai on the floor, OKC's still a good team, but definitely not nearly as dominant without him. Between Shai being on and off the floor, we're still looking at a massive 12.4 points per 100 possession difference, and that could easily be the difference between OKC being a solid playoff team and them being clear favorites to win the West and even the NBA title this season. Also, looking at it, J-Dub is Shai's only All-Star teammate, while Chet Holmgren, OKC's third best player, has played only more than 600 minutes all season, and even starting big man Isaiah Hartenstein has missed 22 games for the year. But none of that matters, as Shai has still made 57% of his 2-point shots and 37% of his 3-point shots, all while having a total of 12 40-point games and 4 50-point games this season, which both lead the entire NBA. The OKC Thunder are also built like a historical all-defensive unit, with their success tied to how they aggressively convert turnovers into buckets on the other end. And while SGA rarely matches up with opponents' best players, with OKC having a stockpile of lockdown defenders, he still does his part to contribute to that defensive identity. Shai's still averaging 1.7 steals per game, which is pretty much equal to Jokic's 1.8 steals. But then Shai also ranks 11th in deflections per game, and as the primary defender, he also also held opponents to just 43.2% shooting, which is a top 20 mark among all players to contest at least 500 shots this season. That kind of A+ impact from Shai should make anyone a lock to win MVP 9 times out of 10, with Nikola Jokic's equally impressive season potentially being the only exception. Moving on, let's now talk about the team success category. As of the making of this video, the Nuggets have a 45-28 record, standing at the 3rd spot in the Western Conference while being on pace to finish with 52 wins for the season. Meanwhile, the OKC Thunder are the best team in the NBA at 60 wins and 12 losses and are on pace to finish with at least 69 wins for the season. Though it's worth noting that holding the best record in the league doesn't seem to matter to MVP voters nearly as much as it used to. Over the last 20 years, only 11 MVPs came from the team with the best record, and particularly the last 4 MVPs, 3 for Jokic and 1 for Embiid, actually came with neither the Nuggets and 76ers having the best record in the NBA. Well, recently, Michael Malone acknowledged SGA's season, but he pulled back against the notion that the player coming from the team with the best record should have an edge in terms of MVP voting. More specifically, Malone highlighted how Joel Embiid won MVP over Jokic in 2023 when the Nuggets had the best record in the West, while the 76ers were only the 3rd seed in the Eastern Conference. But I think the only problem with that argument is the fact that the 76ers were still 1 game ahead of the Nuggets that season, which still gives Joel Embiid's team the better record despite them being a 3rd seed. So I definitely believe that the element of team success should factor in when looking at some close MVP races just like this year's, and overall, OKC has 15 more wins and are on pace to finish the season with 17 more wins than Denver, and that is definitely a huge gap that could make a difference for voters. Lastly, let's talk about the narrative surrounding this year's MVP race. Well, I'm still trying to wrap my head around the brilliance of Nikola Jokic, and definitely, one of the reasons he's been so great is that nobody saw him coming. Jokic was drafted in the 2nd round, and unlike players like LeBron James or Luka Doncic, there were simply no expectations for the Joker to be this legendary. The dominance of Nikola Jokic simply can't be denied, which is why I think the idea of voter fatigue just doesn't make sense. It's also worth noting that out of the 69 players that have been awarded MVP in NBA history, 33 of them, or 48% of them, including Jokic himself, were actually part of multi-year winning streaks by the same player. Basically, the NBA has always been a league of dynasties, and its MVP winners are no different. So I think if Jokic loses this year's MVP race, it's not because voters are simply tired of him. On the other hand, there's also this narrative that this is now Shai Gilgeous-Alexander's time and he should be rewarded for his ascension to the top of the NBA. But if anything, I think the narrative should be Shai, just like Nikola Jokic, is simply unguardable. Well, to me, the MVP doesn't necessarily have to be the player with the most mind-blowing stats or the slickest on and off differential. Well, sure, those numbers play into the conversation, but ultimately, I think the MVP is about what all those numbers have actually accomplished. And it's just that the OKC Thunder are on pace to win 69-70 games this season with a net rating that is 9 points better than that of the Denver Nuggets. And Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, who might be the best two-way player in the NBA this season, is the primary reason why. And to me, that's a narrative worthy of the MVP award and a justifiable enough reason for Shai to win, and not just because Nikola Jokic has already won MVP multiple times before. Thank you guys if you've actually made it this far into the video, but at this point of the season, who is actually your pick to win the MVP award? Feel free to drop your thoughts in the comment section below, and again, if you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing as well. Again, this has been Real Balls, and I'll see you on the next one. Peace.